Okay, well, first, thank you for joining us. I wanted to mention that live transcription is available. You can access it at the bottom where it says CC live transcript, live caption. Additionally, the symposium will be recorded and available on the Bernstein Institute website. We'd like to begin today's symposium by acknowledging that NYU is located on the Lenape-Hoking unceded ancestral homelands of the Lenape people. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Lenape community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. We acknowledge that NYU was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institution is located. We believe that addressing structural Indigenous exclusion and erasure is critically important, and we are committed to actively working to overcome the ongoing effects and realities of settler colonialism within the institutions where we work. Thank you so much for joining us today for the NYU Law Review and the Bernstein Institute for Human Rights Symposium, Critical Legal Empowerment, Strategies for Community-Built Justice. My name is Sarah Miller, and I'm a managing editor for the NYU Law Review and one of the co-organizers of this event, which has been a year in the making. A year ago, the Law Review put out a call for symposium proposals. In the call for proposals, we described what type of submissions we were hoping to receive. In particular, we wrote, we hope to present an inclusive and forward-looking symposium that blends legal frameworks with radical imagination. More concretely, though we recognize the need to critique current systems, we hope to host an event that emphasizes creative, doctrinal, and community-based solutions. The Bernstein Institute both answered and surpassed that call. In their submission, they wrote, inspired by scholars of critical race theory, this quality of critique also requires self-reflection, humility, and a commitment to critical praxis, a groundedness in the grassroots. The symposium will be an opportunity to address ways that communities can know, use, shape, and ultimately transform the law that too often shuts them out. We spent this year shaping and reshaping our vision of the symposium, adjusting from in-person to remote, from fall to spring. We've hosted 2 writing workshops along the way in hopes that the publications that we produce from this symposium honors the goals and commitments of this project, a desire to democratize knowledge production and center the voices that demands of those directly impacted in the building of an American legal ecosystem that is truly just. I'm so grateful for the Law Review's partnership with the Bernstein Institute because the heart of the symposium wasn't just a concept, but a commitment. I hope everyone feels welcome here in this space. It's truly an honor that you've joined us today. Arijit.
Thanks so much, Sarah. My name is Arijit Sharma, he, him pronouns. I'm the editor-in-chief of the NYU Law Review. I want to once again express our extreme gratitude for you for joining today and also for everyone who's put in countless hours in making this event possible. I'm really excited to see what the next couple of days will bring. So the Law Review is a generalist student-run publication that's been operating since 1924. And we publish 6 print issues every year. We publish articles by scholars, practitioners. We publish student notes, and we also publish pieces online and on a newly launched blog. And so we're really excited to further all of our publication goals through the symposium. We always aim to publish innovative scholarship on cutting edge, really important issues related to the law. And part of the reason why we're so excited about this symposium is that we'll be publishing scholarship across all of our various media forms related to the symposium. And so really bringing the knowledge production that comes from these few days into fruition through our publication process. And the voices that will be amplified in this setting will really move scholarship forward, not only at our school, but also at journals and institutions across the country. So thank you so much. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to Meg.
Thank you, Arijit. My name is Meg Satterthwaite, and I'm the faculty director of the Bernstein Institute. I use she, her pronouns. It's my job this morning to welcome you to the Critical Legal Empowerment Strategies for Community-Built Justice Symposium, to offer a few words of thanks, and then to invite our opening panel to get the proceedings underway. We at the Bernstein Institute are especially excited to be partnering on this symposium with the Law Review. And we want to thank the staff of the Law Review, most especially Editor-in-Chief Arijit Sharma and Managing Editor Sarah Miller, for their wholehearted collaboration on this endeavor. Not only did they and their team dive in completely to make this event happen, but they've also given countless hours, stayed up many nights, and spent maybe too much time in Zoom rooms speaking about how they want to place this powerful legal publication, the NYU Law Review, which has long been one of the most important publications in the legal world, at the service of knowledge built by grassroots justice advocates. And it's really not an overstatement to say that the Law Review makes knowledge in this space and has a strong, strong impact. We're thrilled, therefore, that Law Review will be publishing works written by the panelists you'll hear from today and tomorrow. This recognition of rooted knowledge, this embrace of scholarship written by those most affected by injustice, sends a message to other legal publications, as well as to law schools, law professors like me, and to law students, that law can only be just when it advances justice among those often excluded, pushed aside, or actively harmed by legal systems. And that is the message of what we're calling critical legal empowerment. Legal empowerment led by the grassroots with lawyers and other professionals in supporting rather than leading roles is a crucial part of the justice transformation that's needed today. When rights holders directly engage institutions affecting their lives, they demand that systems become more accessible and more responsive to the daily challenges they face. And when the law and legal systems are actively harming marginalized and oppressed people, a critical form of legal empowerment can ensure that they are the authors of their own liberation that demands transformation of the law and legal systems. We urge a critical shift to understanding that social change and transformations in major economic, social, and cultural structures will only come when legal efforts effectively build the power of communities facing human rights violations. Building political power and armed with legal tools, movements can change the conditions of communities and are changing those conditions now by shifting power within societies for good. Such political power is also needed to change the global systems that have led to radical inequality and its results. At a time when those results, including racialized mortality, the death of working class frontline workers in our global pandemic, and the deathly injustice of climate change and the climate crisis as unfolding disaster are at front and center, human rights has an opportunity. It can join with internationally aware and globally inflected movements, embracing legal empowerment and other methods for transformation, renewing the spirit of a field that has become increasingly irrelevant in many places. This critical component of critical legal empowerment entails a rejection of technocratic approaches, sometimes forwarded by access to justice practitioners, and an embrace of community-based efforts to engage the legal system in strategies to shift power downward. So as Sarah already said, we're really inspired by scholars of critical race theory, and we want to embrace self-reflection, humility, and a commitment to critical practice. Boomba, you might want to unmute there. Okay, so I was actually about to thank Boomba because I want to thank those members of our community justice advocate advisory group who led the creation of this symposium, including Nixon Boomba, Ariadna Goudreau-Aubert, Antonio Gutierrez, Lam Ho, Jay Monteverde, Jhody Polk, Alejo Rodriguez, and Jayshree Sapute. Thank you so much for your vision, energy, and hard work. In partnership with our advisory committee members, we engaged in a process of collective inquiry, action, and reflection to co-create this gathering to solidify the knowledge that comes from lived experience. Together, we've created a gathering that democratizes knowledge production, breaks down hierarchies between expert and audience, and centers the voices and demands of directly impacted communities. And this all has happened on Zoom. The gathering includes panels where we'll hear stories and strategies from those leading justice fights and interactive workshops in which you're all invited to discuss, debate, and advance visions of community-led justice. So we're eager to begin. But let me say a few words about the Bernstein Institute and thank a few other folks who made this possible. The Bernstein Institute was created to honor the human rights of Robert and Helen Bernstein, two champions of human rights, defenders, and also advocates of expanded access to justice for all. We're incredibly grateful to the Bernstein family for creating this institute to honor this incredible legacy. I want to thank the Institute's advisory board for their leadership, support, and guidance in all of our activities, And I want to acknowledge a generous support and partnership from the Legal Empowerment Network convened by Namati, the Mott Foundation, and the Tuttleman Family Foundation. I also want to thank Dean Trevor Morrison for his terrific support in making all of this and the day-to-day work of the Institute possible. I want to thank Sukti Dhital, Executive Director of the Institute, who has helped shepherd and co-design this convening and brought together the incredible speakers who join us. About 5 years ago, the Bernstein Institute was lucky enough to recruit Sukti from her post as Executive Director of Nazdik in India, a legal empowerment organization she co-founded. She's had an absolutely transformational impact on the Institute, and this symposium illustrates her leadership and vision. Thank you, Sukti. I want to thank Tyler Walton, the Tuttleman Legal Empowerment Attorney, who's done an incredible job shaping this symposium with creativity, heart, and vision. And Logan Jacobs, the Institute's program manager, who's at this moment keeping all the moving parts on track. And Amesha Iles and Mela Chuponda, researchers and activists who steward our participatory research initiatives. I want to thank the student fellows who've worked to support the workshops, panels, and papers. Haley Corkery, Janavi Jagannath, Sean Lamberg, and Alejandra Torres. We could not be more proud or more humbled to host these dynamic speakers who've joined us on Zoom to share strategies, tactics, and lessons for building the powers of community to create justice. And now I'd like to turn it over to Sukti.
Thank you so much, Meg. And thank you, Sarah, Arijit, the entire Law Review team, our incredible group of NYU Law Student Fellows, our advisory committee members. To see all of you from all over the world joining us just makes the heart full. So thank you all for being with us. This has truly been a labor of love for us, and we are grateful. Before we get started with our opening session, just a few housekeeping items. We will be offering CLE credit for the symposium for New York Barred attorneys. And this event is appropriate for both newly admitted and experienced attorneys. So just to make sure your credits get counted, please record the verification codes that you're going to be hearing in each of the sessions and include that in your affirmation document. And this information Tyler's just put in the chat. You can pull it up from our website. And definitely reach out to us if you have any questions. And speaking of the chat, already seeing a lot of activity from Cambodia and Nigeria and the US. And so please do continue your thoughts, your questions, your reflections on the chat, because we really do see this gathering as a conversation in motion. On that note, here we are. So we're in the opening session and it's titled, What is Critical Legal Empowerment? And I wanted to start with turning to the words of writer and political activist, such a deep thinker, Arundhati Roy, who says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice, our hatred, our avarice, our data banks, our dead bodies, our dead rivers, and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So over the next 2 days, we hope to imagine with all of you. We hope to fight for a world where knowledge that comes from lived experience is solidified, and communities are deeply engaged in the building of just and inclusive legal ecosystems. So to begin, I would ask my friends and fellow panelists to turn on your videos, just so we can see your lovely faces. To begin, we will explore what it means to embrace community-based efforts to democratize legal power, to democratize and redistribute legal power. And our speakers will share their respective journeys to legal empowerment and interrogate what's needed to create space for communities to directly engage in legal work and the legal profession. We will first hear from my dear friend. So we have three fantastic humans in conversation today. We have Jhody Polk, Vivek, Maru, and Lam Ho. I will introduce them each in turn and ask them first to share some opening remarks. And then we hope to have a really spirited and thought-provoking conversation amongst us and with you all. So we will first hear from my dear friend, Jhody Polk. Jhody is a community peace builder and a defender of justice and Black women. She is the founder and director of the Legal Empowerment and Advocacy Hub. LEA is an organization dedicated to growing legal empowerment in the US with a real strong focus on the Jailhouse Lawyer Initiative. Jhody is a 2018 Soros Justice Fellow and a proud mother and formerly incarcerated jailhouse lawyer. Jhody, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sukti, and for everybody being on this call. This is the highlight of my life, of talking about and moving towards peace and justice. And so as Sukti was saying, I think I have a lot of titles, but mother and jailhouse lawyer happens to be two of my most favorite. And for me, my journey of legal empowerment, which is my journey of community and freedom, really appreciate this panel because for me, this is not my work. This is such a personal pursuit that has just really opened up the pathways for me to be a part of this global movement towards justice. But my journey started in prison in 2007 as a jailhouse lawyer, where myself and so many other women, for the first time in our lives, understood and got the opportunity to see how the law and policy actually affected our lives on a day-to-day basis. And so through those 7 years of being incarcerated, studying the law, not studying people, but studying the law, studying democracy, being able to see the hope of how law could be protective in that isolated prison community really inspired me to be a lawyer. And I came home with just one goal. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted that legal education and I wanted to be able to bring it back to my community. And when I came home and started that journey, I never imagined that I would be where I'm at today. And so I'll never forget in 2018 when winning that Soros project, which initiated the Jailhouse Lawyers Initiative, as well as that was the same year that we were preparing to launch the first participatory defense hub in Florida. It gave me peace because even though I hadn't gone to law school yet, I was still moving towards, right? I was moving towards and working towards those dreams. And I really believed at that time that I could not do legal empowerment until maybe 10 or 15 years later when I was probably a lawyer. And something magical happened for me. I had the opportunity to travel abroad and attend one of the legal empowerment webinars where I was introduced to Namati and the Bernstein Institute for Human Rights. And legal empowerment has forever. It wasn't the first time I met legal empowerment, but it was the first time that I heard the name, and it was like coming home. And so for me, critical legal empowerment looks like what we in the United States imagine could be abolition. To me, critical legal empowerment is proactive approaches that allows us as people, lawyers, justice impacted people, I don't care who you are, people to be in the right position at the right time to stand up to injustice. Because injustice isn't just happening, in the back of police cars or in jails and prisons. It happens in schools. It happens in our bodies. It happens in our neighborhoods. It happens in our minds. It happens all the time. As someone that has been incarcerated in prisons before, I immediately knew how deeper incarceration is. Incarceration isn't just a physical restriction of your body. Incarceration can happen mentally, it can happen physically, it can happen in all types of ways. And I come from isolated communities, which is another thing that legal empowerment had given me. In the United States, I always heard of my communities as marginalized, as poor communities, as criminalized communities, but we're none of those things. We are isolated communities that operate within one another, separated from the larger communities. And so legal empowerment has been a safe road, not for me to just go out and be a justice defender, but for me and my family, for me and my community, for me and my neighbors, for me and our youth, for me and my local leaders, for me and institutions, for me and my incarcerated communities to think about the law, for us to use the law so that we can become shapers and transformers of the law. It is so exciting to me, even in the United States, amongst, you know, our issue of incarceration, because I do believe hope is a strategy, and I see the inroads, and legal empowerment has given us the way. When I imagine jailhouse lawyers, you know, across this country helping people to learn the law, who are working with people to use the law, it really makes me excited that to see those 2.5 million people that we know in the US go through that system. We know all the data, right? So to me, legal empowerment, when I think about people coming home from prisons back into our neighborhoods, knowing and using the law, what could we not accomplish? The relationship that I have with the Bernstein Institute for Human Rights, the work that I'm growing in an equalized, shared, powered way. I sometimes forget that Sukti and Tyler are lawyers, and that, you know, we have these diversities on our team because we actually model and believe what we're setting out to do. And so to me, this has been amazing. I sometimes now struggle with being called justice impacted. I would prefer to be called a community paralegal. I prefer to be acknowledged as a legal empowerment practitioner. I prefer to be acknowledged as a researcher, because part data justice, you know, being able to understand these things, it's not just a method, right, for outer justice. This has been a method for inner peace and inner justice. And I know the power of when we believe that peace and hope is possible. You get up every day expecting it, looking for it. You find it in some of the most unexpected places. And that's not just something that we've done in prison. That's something that I get to do every day as an organizer and a legal empowerment practitioner. So to me, legal empowerment is me being able to not be defined by an institution with a law degree. I'm still gonna get one, but I get to teach the law every day, and I get to model the law every day. I get to work with amazing lawyers across the globe who ask me questions and allow me to ask them questions, and then we link hands and we pull in those who most needed to be there. But we also resist and stand up to institutions and places that make it clear that we're not welcome. So really excited to continue furthering these conversations. Not all the time, I think that's important in legal empowerment. I don't always know what it looks like. And to me, that's an important part of legal empowerment. If the goal is that we're working towards legal transformation, I expect that some of our work, we won't know what it looks like. I expect us to be coming up with new creations, endeavors, because truly legal empowerment belongs to the people. To see the law starting to look like the people is a transformative process that allows us to come to a place, and I am a peace builder, where we can then create the foundation, right, for peace to happen, for us to collaboratively shape our countries, our states, our homes, our communities, and essentially the world. So I'm excited to continue to use legal empowerment as a bridge to bring community members, not just our wisdom, our bodies, our hope, our stories, our songs, to bring community back together, and to also create healthy institutions. And I think that's important, a piece of the legal empowerment as well. It's not just, right? I think even institutions and schools and people are made, institutions are made of people. And so legal empowerment, rather in the hands of a lawyer, a community member, a youth, a community paralegal, a jailhouse lawyer, a mother, allows us to represent and stand up, not to just injustice, but to also be messengers of hope and peace. So that's what critical legal is to me. And really looking forward to continuing this work and to see what jailhouse lawyers create with it, to see what community paralegals in the United States looks like. I'm looking forward to see what Florida looks like when we bring Chicago inside of that. I'm looking forward to see what it looks like when my global partners have access to local neighborhoods, and local neighborhoods have access, right, to the world. So this is truly an organizing tool for myself, for my family, and for countless of isolated communities throughout the United States. Thank you, Sukti.
Thank you so much, Jhody. There's so much there for us to dig into in conversation, and thank you for lighting the spark of radical imagination for us, Jhody. Can always count on you to see more. Okay, now next up we have another dear friend, Vivek Maru, who is the CEO and founder of Namati. Vivek started Namati in 2011, and since then, Namati and its partners have supported cadres of grassroots legal advocates in 10 countries around the world, and has helped create this profoundly important network called the Legal Empowerment Network, which many of you out there in the chat world are a member of. And Vivek lives and truly believes that we can advance social and environmental justice by deepening democracy. So Vivek, over to you, my friend.
Namaste, everybody. Thank you, Sukti. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, NYU Law Review. What a serious pleasure and honor to be in conversation with the three of you, Sukti, Jhody, Lam, each of whom I have learned a lot from over the years. And I would just say, Jhody, in addition to being a researcher and a legal empowerment practitioner and a messenger of hope and peace, she's on the Namati board, so she's my boss too. And so it's always an honor to share space with you, and I need to be on my best behavior. And I love the question about journeys to legal empowerment, because it is a journey. And I know there's some folks in law school. I mean, we're hosted by NYU Law Review. Are there any first years in the place? Any first years on the Zoom chat? I almost dropped out my first year. I had written my undergrad thesis about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Gandhi, and I had spent the year after law school, the year after graduating college in Kutch, which is my home place in India, where my family comes from, living in a hut of dung and sticks and working with a couple of grassroots organizations that I deeply admired. And when I got to law school, the things that we were being taught, the torts, the contracts, the procedure, even the constitutional law, it felt so elite and so abstract and so disconnected from the collective struggles for justice that inspired me, that I really felt like I wasn't in the right place. And I almost dropped out. It was actually a couple of friends who convinced me to hang in there. After law school, I clerked for a judge, Marsha Burzon, on the Ninth Circuit, who I love, and I worked for Human Rights Watch for a year, which is an incredible institution, but I still didn't quite feel at home, and I wasn't quite sure where I was headed. And then in 2003, I moved to Sierra Leone at the invitation of a few domestic human rights groups. And this was right as an 11-year devastating civil war was ending in Sierra Leone. And there was a consensus among people in Sierra Leone that the root causes of that conflict, which had caused the deaths of 10,000 people, civilians, and which had completely devastated Sierra Leone's institutions, its social fabric, the root causes of that conflict were injustice, arbitrariness in governance, unfairness in the way decisions were made. And these human rights organizations, they wanted to do something going forward to make sure that when people face grave injustices, they have somewhere to go, they have some way to redress them, so that that Sierra Leone wouldn't go back to where it had come from, wouldn't go back to that searing conflict that it had come from. But it was unclear at that moment what that would look like, in part because in Sierra Leone, there were only 100 lawyers total at the time. And out of the 100, more than 90 lived in Freetown in the capital. So if you go to the countryside, even a rich person couldn't get counsel. And Sierra Leone, like many countries, has a plural legal system where you have customary traditional institutions in the countryside and formal institutions that were inherited from Britain, which was the colonial power. And in principle, they're kind of under one constitution, but in practice, they sort of operate in parallel. And lawyers can't even stand up in the customary institutions, but those are the ones that the majority of people go to when they have basic issues. And so a lawyer-based model of offering legal aid would have been a non-starter, would not have worked. And what we did instead, Jhody referred to herself as a community paralegal. We experimented with a community paralegal approach. And we didn't come up with that. We took inspiration from South Africa, where community paralegals have been working since the 1950s, when they were a key part of the struggle against apartheid. And with my partner, Simeon Koroma, we spent a few weeks early on in South Africa walking with community paralegals there today who are working to this moment to fulfill, having beaten apartheid, to fulfill the progressive promises of the South African Constitution. And just to give you a sense, I mean, if you go to a lawyer's office in Freetown, you could walk in the room and explain the issue that you have. And the lawyer might say in Sierra Leone in Creole, okay, I don't hear you, left the money, me go handle them for you. I've heard you, put some money on the table, I'm gonna handle it for you. I've got you. Just not that different from what a lawyer's office, you might hear from a lawyer in a lawyer's office in DC, which is where I'm speaking from right now. A community paralegal's message is different from that. You know, it's not, I'm going to handle it for you. It's, we're going to handle it together. And in the process, we are going to grow. We're going to learn more. We're going to get more powerful. And you're not alone. You're not the only one facing this injustice. We're going to come together with others facing the same problem, and we're going to build power together. And I think that is the message of community paralegal. That is the message of legal empowerment. And to our surprise, despite broken institutions, we found that paralegals and communities, by invoking the law with specificity, by combining the power of law, no matter how imperfect that law is, with the power of people, we're often able to squeeze justice out of that broken system. To when a woman in Freetown who was a sex worker and used to sell cigarettes from the top of her head, when she was beaten in the middle of the night by a drunk police officer, unconscious and left laying in the street, that woman was able to work with a paralegal, pursue redress. We didn't get the solution we wanted, but she did get a public apology from the police officer and payment of compensation more than she ever imagined was possible. When communities in southern Sierra Leone had their lands ravaged by a mining company and then were just left for dead, the mining company picked up and left the place without undoing the damage it had done, paralegals and communities, with the backup of a couple of lawyers, were able to get that mining company to undam the river that it had blocked, to fill the huge 2-story pits that it had left in the ground, and to pay some meaningful compensation. Over and over, we found you couldn't get perfect solutions, but you could squeeze some justice out of a broken system. And so I have been obsessed ever since. I ended up working at the World Bank for a few years, which is a story in and of itself, because I had gotten tear gas protesting the World Bank when I was in law school. So I didn't see that coming, but I met some people who I really admired, and I learned a lot about working directly with governments as your clients while I was there. But that whole time I felt called to go back to this grassroots work of combining the power of people and the power of law. And I saw wherever I went, whether it was Bihar in India or Indonesia, wherever I went, I saw the potential for legal empowerment to advance justice. And so in 2011, alongside Songkita Conte from Sierra Leone, Marlon Manuel from the Philippines, Maya Daruwala from India, and many other justice leaders from around the world, we formed Namati, and we formed this legal empowerment network, which today is over 2,800 organizations from over 170 countries. It does feel like we've got the makings of a movement of people committed to justice across every corner of the world. And when I look at what's happening, the emergencies that we face, the ones that Meg was referring to at the outset, a movement of people committed to justice across borders is one of the things we need most. And so I'm excited to build that movement with all of you.
Thank you so much, Vivek. Thank you for walking us through that journey, which feels both inspiring and relatable. And so there's a lot, again, so much for us to talk about together. And I will now introduce the fabulous Lam Ho. Lam is the executive director of Beyond Legal Aid, which unites lawyers and activists through a truly remarkable community-located, community-operated, and community-directed activism law programs. Lam's been doing this work for a long time and has a lot of really important reflections for us to kind of marinate in. So Lam, over to you, my friend.
Thanks so much, Sukti, and thanks so much, Jhody and Vivek. My journey to legal empowerment is really tied to learning and learning from failures. And Jhody and Vivek and Sukti have always been really powerful teachers for me. I do want to apologize in advance. I'm having issues with my Wi-Fi, so hopefully it will not come, but in case I disappear, it probably is because my Wi-Fi went down again, so fingers crossed. But as I mentioned, my journey is really tied to learning from some very significant failures in my practice as a lawyer. So I've trained, and most days I'm a litigator. So I approach legal empowerment from this lens of how do I get to the vision that I have of myself as a lawyer while struggling with the limitations, restrictions, and challenges of our legal system in the US. I operate strictly domestically, so a lot of my experience is based in US courts. In fact, all of my experience is based on US courts. I'll start with what this vision of lawyering that I have and where it comes from. So I grew up as an immigrant born in Vietnam in very difficult financial straits. And I watched, my mother be silenced as a victim of domestic violence, who basically lost everything in her divorce because she didn't speak the language and agreed to a marital separation agreement that she felt she had no choice because she would otherwise be deported, which was actually not true at all. But she had no voice in the legal system. I also watched my father be in court and basically not say a single word as he's being faced with criminal charges that could put him in prison. And instead, his son, who actually wasn't at the incident whatsoever, spoke to the judge, and basically his word was taken because he spoke English. And what was fascinating was the entire proceeding probably lasted less than 10 minutes. And most of it was actually spent with the judge asking me about my experience at university, as opposed to actually talking about what happened with my father. And literally, my father said not a single word as his a very momentous situation in his life occurred. Luckily, the judge really liked me, and so the case was dismissed against my father. But that was sort of the images that I had of our legal system, of people not having voices, not given the opportunity to speak, even as their entire lives are decided, and in some cases, their entire lives are completely ruined. That was why I wanted to go to law school, to be someone who could challenge that dehumanizing and silencing voices in the legal system. Before law school, I was actually an organizer. And so there, particularly around HIV and the AIDS crisis for gay, queer men, I did a lot of organizing, which was centered around building power, facilitating moments of self-empowerment by community members and communities that were really impacted by the situations that they were facing, and how they could create their own response, as opposed to waiting for the CDC or the government to tell them how to protect their own lives and how to respond to their own sexual identities and sexual behavior. So those were the two really critical moments that I took with me to law school: how to create voice and how to build power and facilitate self-empowerment for those who are impacted by injustice. I was very fortunate in law school to very quickly discover community lawyering. And so my legal education was framed by community lawyering and movement lawyering. And that's what I trained myself. That was my training as a lawyer. So I left law school. Honestly, I left law school thinking I was some hotshot community lawyer, movement lawyer. And I was like, I was a research assistant, and I wrote about, and I was a teaching assistant and reframed our poverty law curriculum around community lawyering and movement lawyering. So I was like, I got this. So I moved to Chicago, and I became a community movement lawyer on the west side of Chicago. So for 2 years, I did really powerful work. I got to know amazing people, and I was working in community. So I created 10 community legal clinics that were located in community spaces. And it was holistic in the sense that whoever came in, I would take on whatever legal issue that they had, as long as I could get support from the organization where my project was based. I walked in communities, knocked on doors to get to know people. So, here is what I believed was community lawyering. And I did it for 2 years. I won some amazing cases, everything from orders of protection for victims of domestic violence to getting wages for people who had their wages stolen, prevented evictions, cleared criminal records for those who were impacted by their criminal past. And I did that. And so this is for me, probably the moment that I started my journey towards legal empowerment. And it was basically when I realized I had basically completely failed as a community lawyer, and that for 2 years, I completely missed the boat. So this sort of the teacher of community lawyering somehow completely failed, and it was as I said, the work was great, but from my own understanding and the values that I hold as a community lawyer, which is about empowerment and not victimization, which is about giving voice, which is about facilitating self-empowerment, I completely failed. And let me explain to you why. So for 2 years, I had this community located, a community operated program where I thought I was holistic and responsive, and I would take on whatever cases that the community needed. About 18 months into the process, my community partner, my main community partner, called me in for a meeting and said, we really value what you've done. You really demonstrated the impact that legal services can have on our work as a church for the community. Let me introduce you to your replacement. And can you spend the rest of your time here training and orienting and transitioning so that your replacement can do the work instead? So in that moment, what I felt was devastation. I felt betrayal, honestly. Like, I had moved to Chicago, had no idea didn't know anyone in Chicago. I came for this work, and without any notice, any understanding, I was being replaced by someone. And it took me probably about 1.5 years to really get to a place of understanding what happened, because in that moment, it just felt so hurtful. I felt, to be honest with you, pretty big ego, and to be told like, hey, we don't want you, grade, was not something that was easy to swallow. But it took me 1.5 years later, and I realized that moment was such a critical moment in my professional career, because it actually forced me to challenge and forced me to think outside of this confidence and this sort of this perspective that I had that I was a community lawyer. And what made me realize was that I somehow missed such a critical foundational question of the work that I was doing. And it was actually really about the humanity and the relationship that I had failed in. So I will say now that my quote unquote replacement, has created one of the most powerful community learning organizations in the entire country. And I think the work that they're doing are absolutely phenomenal. And when I reflect upon what happened, I really now actually see it as a victory for community learning. It was a victory for communities creating their own programs. So that's the first part. Like, I was at a legal aid organization run by lawyers, and what the community wanted and needed was an organization that was created from internally, that the church created their own legal program. And I should have seen that as a victory, not as why was I being replaced? The person who replaced me was someone who moved and lived in the community and actually is a member of the church. And that sense of this is someone from the community was something that I overlooked. And it really demonstrated like the goal of community learning is in many ways for lawyers to be replaced, for us to not be the ones who are doing the work, but instead allowing the community to create their own power and recognize what they could do. And ultimately, you know, it should be someone someone who fully understands and is immersed in the community experience that should be in charge, not someone who has many different values. So I'm not a member of the church. I don't share the Christian faith. So it's a huge factor that I overlooked. The organization now is also an organization that focuses on one particular area of law, which is criminal justice. And so they do wraparound holistic services for individuals, particularly youth who are impacted by the criminal justice system. What was interesting is, you know, I said I started this conversation by saying I was holistic, and that was my sort of my project proposal. Like, I would be holistic. I would take on whatever cases would come to the door. But I worked at an organization that is funded by the Legal Services Corporation. For those of you who might not be familiar with it, the Legal Services Corporation is the American government federal funding that's $300 to $400 million a year for legal aid. It's the largest source of funding, but it comes with almost, I think it's like 27 when I last counted, restrictions on how you can not only use that money, but how you can spend money at all. And one of which is you can't do criminal justice work. They feel that because there's a public defender system, if you receive the LSC funding, you can't do criminal justice work. So how is it that I completely missed the boat on this critical priority that this community had, when the community had the opportunity to define its own priorities? The only one they chose was an area that for 2 years I was completely not conscious was their number one practice area. How did that happen? And that leads to the sort of final really critical reflection from Lam Ho's failure as a community lawyer, which is the relationship. I felt that we had this relationship, and as I said, I felt betrayed because no one mentioned that this was happening. No one told me this was going on, and it was a shock to me. But I never questioned why was it that way, and why was it that the community didn't trust me? Why did the community not feel that they could tell me this? And it had a lot to do with the power dynamics. Like, the community felt as if these restrictions that existed, that I was operating out of a legal aid organization that was, I was in the community, but the organization was based downtown. You know, I never built the relationship. And so that's the final piece for me, which is how being a lawyer, what is my relationship and what's the dynamic and what's the power relationship between quote unquote an attorney and quote unquote and a client or a community that the attorney is working with. And that's for me where these lessons brought me to legal empowerment. So I think community learning and movement learning are really powerful parts of my legal education and my training. And they really allowed me to speak the critical values that I take as a litigator. The idea of being led by communities, the idea of being in the communities, the idea of deferring and supporting movements and their agendas. That's something that I really I think I owe so much, and I still call myself a community lawyer and a movement lawyer. But where legal empowerment takes me is to really really question, in many ways, the humanity of who I am as a lawyer, and the relationships and the relationships between myself, the people I am lucky to collaborate with, and the legal system, and how all those relationships and how we engage with each other at this very basic level of, you are my partner, you are my collaborator, we're allies. How, as I think Jhody mentioned, this idea of us all sort of holding hands together across the world. How does that, what does holding hands mean? And I think that framework of who I am as a lawyer and how I'm able to step out of the role and step out of the expectations and the boundaries of being a lawyer is where legal empowerment is so critical, because it forces us as lawyers who are trained in a certain tradition, who have certain sort of practices and routines that are so ingrained into us. How do we step away from that and recognize that even in the very act of being a lawyer, even when I am quote unquote lawyering and writing a brief or speaking in court, am that my power away, or am I just redefining the very, very
Oof, we're like at that moment where we just need to hear what he's about to say.
And the dynamics of power that exist in the legal community is many, many mistakes, many, many mistakes. So,
Lam, I feel like you just espoused some real genius again, and I think we might have lost you for a second. Please come back to us. And if you need to turn your video off, that's fine, if that will help with the connection. Wow. Okay. I would like us, if it's okay, I mean, I think just to take a moment to just appreciate.
So I'm back. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, you're back.
Am I back?
Okay.
Yet?
Yeah, you're back. Okay.
And I'm right. I'm done. I think I'm done. So hopefully, so we can move on. Thank you. Thank you and sorry. Thank you and sorry.
You're not done, Mom. You're just beginning. We still have a half an hour left to dig in, and I think I just want to start by appreciating each of your, like, the approach to humility and vulnerability that you took to talking about this work, to recognizing where it didn't feel good, to recognizing where you didn't feel seen, to recognizing all the ways in which there was dislocation and discomfort when we are thinking about the law and thinking about system transformation. So it's not easy to say I mess up, but like I do believe that a big part of this journey is the recognition of power and the recognition of the power of humility and vulnerability. So thank you for that. And I guess we talked about this a bit. I mean, I have so many questions, and you all can kind of pivot off of each other on things that really resonated with you as others were talking. But, you know, one of the things that for me, if I put my legal empowerment practitioner hat on, like what drew me to this work was this moral and also kind of pragmatic realization. And this goes off of working in India, where there are different, you know, justice barriers, cost, access to qualified representation, just so many people in need of different types of support, was that pragmatically it didn't make sense, because like the Sierra Leone context, you just can't clone, you know, 1 million folks and say, okay, go, here are some attorneys. It's financially really difficult. But just the fact that we were operating in these ways in which communities were coming in to sign papers and put their thumbs on stuff and maybe show up for court and then not be seen again. And here we would in India, you actually introduce yourself as I. You don't even say I am a lawyer. You represent yourself as I, Sukti, as if that's the name of your client. I mean, there are so many structural ways that require another conversation. But what we realized is that there was a moral imperative that the people whose lives are so endangered by this system are not having a sense of understanding about what's going on. There is not time that we spend as attorneys, as those with technical expertise, to explain, to translate, to figure out how to have conversation. And to me, that is what struck me as why this field matters, is that we have this duty to be able to create and carve out space for individuals impacted to engage in the direction of their justice work, to understand, to pivot, to demand. And that, I think, is essential for us to create a type of ecosystem that actually thrives. And so one of the things that stands out for legal empowerment is it's about getting community members to do legal work. It's about deciding what that profession looks like. And so I'm answering my question, which is, what do I think is the biggest barrier for all of us when we think about furthering this field? When we think about, there was a question in the chat about how we recognize that the rule of law is constantly under threat, that organizers are under a threat, communities are under a threat. And here we are saying, let's figure out a way for you all to engage and direct. How do we do that? What do you all think are the barriers to being able to let this field flourish? And what do you think are the kind of consequences of pushing this kind of field forward at this moment in time? And anyone can start.
Sukti, why I still have Wi-Fi, I go, so I jump in. And I think that for me, it's really tied to from us on a domestic level. I think it's tied to the American legal system and the profession. I think one of the things that makes legal empowerment so powerful for me is that I'm hearing from the experiences of people in other countries where there's not as such a over-regulated legal profession. So that puts so much restriction on who can actually transact law, who can go into court and who can speak. And for me, I think one of the critical work that I think that I and anyone else who is in court needs to do is really challenge every day how we do our work and how we've been trained to do our work. And I'll try to quickly provide this example, but I was working on this case for a tenant association. And so one of the big areas that of, I think, legal empowerment in housing law is tenants, particularly those who don't have leases and therefore in all states have very limited power when it comes to evictions and court processes because they don't have a contract that says this is how long you get to stay there. So a response to that is tenant unions, tenants sort of taking on traditions and strategies of the labor movement to say, if we negotiate collectively, we can build power that we didn't have if we were to handle cases individually. But in this case, I was working on the litigation side, and the tenant union was doing so much organizing outside of the courts. And they had this great campaign where they publicly shamed the developer and landlord regarding the actions that they were taking. And they were so effective at it. I got a call from the attorney for the developer and landlord to say,
It's like we're timed at the most.
He can't
like,
deal
what
with this
did the
anymore.
attorney say?
We'll give you whatever you.
So I think we need to come back to my friend. I do know what happened in this story, and if the suspense is killing folks before Alam comes back, I will happily share. But I think he should, once he comes back, he can finish that story. Otherwise, I will.
So should I go really quick?
I think you should go, Jhody, while Alam is doing his thing.
So to me, I think thank you for this question. Some of the biggest barriers are the old narratives. these things that we've been taught and these things that we hear. Like, I think sometimes we don't recognize how the old narratives, are still shaping our work, our practice, the lack of imagination for us to take the stuff that we talk about in our focus groups and around the tables to actually go out and practice, those things. And I also noticed that we invest a lot in the systems and institutions, like where we should be talking, versus investing in everyday people. No one would have ever thought that for me, the Bernstein Institute, it was probably like a year into our relationship where I recognized, like, oh my goodness, they're invested in me. Like, they're not just talking to me, but they want to partner, like having and to me, I think this is kind of like a barrier and an opportunity. But one of the things I appreciate about legal empowerment is this is not a short-term fix. This is a long-term process. When we think about what we're overturning, when we think about the process of transformation, I'm an alchemist. As a community member, I've learned how to turn nothing into something. And so I think a lot of times we get a little antsy and anxious, but there is no time. And I do believe that it is a long-term process, as well as the fear. I think fear is a big barrier. And I see a lot of lawyers incarcerated in the courtrooms. I see so many professors incarcerated in their classrooms, so many law school students incarcerated, by their parents and old beliefs. And so the fear to be uniquely yourself, to be vulnerable, to discover. I love Lom Ho's discoveries, right? Not what he messed up, but the process of discovery. And one of the other barriers is we don't celebrate the small victories. If I get up and at least get through 3 things on my to-do list, that's a victory, right? If I can actually get on the calls, like celebrating, I have to celebrate myself. I celebrate when a community member just reached out to me and had a new thought. Like, as a jailhouse lawyer, I never define victory based off the cases that we won. How many people could understand the law? How many people walked out of us smiling? How many people were able to read one part of the West Digest or learn that key? Celebrate the small victories and celebrate yourself. And to me, what we can look forward to is people power. The relationships, I don't stress anymore because I'm not doing this alone. Sharing the process with others. When you have more people you can count on, there's more time, right, for me to be Jhody. As well as we get access. Having these relationships for me gives me access all over the world. I was literally sitting here like, why haven't I gone to Chicago yet? Why haven't I gone? The world is opened up for me to be able to learn more and to do more. And then the law begins to look like the people. I can't wait to become a lawyer. I can imagine when young people in my community become judges, when people start to feel the positions, right, of the law. And so, like, to me, that's exciting to think about in the next 10 years on what judges may be running in my local community, and the fact that people who look like me, people with my experience of all types, can actually participate, even on an elected official, I think is one of the exciting things that I look forward to.
Thank you, Jhody. And I think, Vivek, do you want to weigh in here? I'm sure you have a lot to share, both from the global perspective as well as here in the US. And we can keep our mics off if Jhody, like, this is a conversation, but I don't know if there's like cats in the background or whatever, but if you want to just like, we can keep it.
Crash day.
okay, then you get to do what you gotta do. Yeah, Vivek.
Well, I love listening to all 3 of you, and it's such an important conversation to be having. Just zooming out, we're living in an emergency, and Meg started us off with this, but deep entrenched inequality, climate crisis called red, and then democracy itself is under threat. It's breaking under the weight of nativism and authoritarianism. It's not functioning in a way that can solve the problems that we face at the speed that's necessary, with the effectiveness that's necessary. And what do ordinary people have faced with that crisis, faced with that emergency? What do ordinary people have? We don't have much. We don't have guns. Most of us don't have guns. We don't have much money. So what are the tools we have of countervailing power to stand up to crises like that? I think, two of the most essential tools we've got are the power of law, no matter how imperfect that law is, that it is a set of rules that constrains power, and then the power of ourselves. And it doesn't make sense for those two key essential weapons to be used separately, or one of them to be in the hands of experts. What we want to do, what I think the spirit of legal empowerment aims to do, is to fuse them together. Is the same people should be wielding both of those at the same time, in a way that builds on one another. And I think that's the core of what we are aiming for, is fusing the power of people and the power of law.
And I love how Vivek, you've talked about kind of what that blurring looks like, even when thinking about the American context. And maybe you could share what we talked about, I think, yesterday, around how law and organizing can kind of come together in ways that you've seen are real powerful in other parts of the world. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Lam was mentioning that he thinks of himself as a movement lawyer. Me too, and I love that emerging tradition and the idea of community lawyering is so important. And I think one step further going along those lines that we can take is, because I think the spirit of that is there are organizers, and movement lawyers should be in service of them, and they should be taking their directions from a movement, and they shouldn't be wielding their expertise, lording it over people, but rather they should be working in service of them. I think you could take one step even further, which is to infuse the knowledge of law into the organizing itself, so that it's not that we've got a movement and we've got this expert who's backing us up. It's that we've got a movement and we are also invoking law in the process ourselves directly, and to the extent that, and in a critical way, not assuming that what the law says is right, but in a critical way, invoking it strategically, and also working to shape it and make it better. And Jhody, when I think of your time when you were in prison and working as a jailhouse lawyer, and if people aren't familiar with that term, she was not trained in law. She was incarcerated herself, but she learned law from other prison library clerks. And she used to sit in the prison library and help other inmates to understand what the rules say and to invoke them themselves in their own cases. Jhody, one of the things you told me was you would say, I'll help you get the language right, but you're holding the pen. Like you need to author this petition. And so that journey for someone to take the law from something that's expert and external and to turn it into something that they can understand and use themselves directly, I think that's part of the heart of what we're talking about. Just to give an example from somewhere else, I spent September in Sierra Leone, and I was with this woman, Mrs. Mita Moinya Jallo, who woke up one day to find out that 75,000 acres of rainforest, all the land she's ever known, had been signed away to a European oil palm company for 50 years in a lease agreement for $2.50 a year, without her consent or the consent of any of the 22,000 people who lived on that land. Mrs. Jallo had never been to school. She didn't know how to read, but she fought back. She formed a residents association. She reached out to a pair of community paralegals. They got organized. They started using people power. They demonstrated en masse, and they used law. They analyzed Sierra Leonean land law. It turned out that the lease was totally in violation of Sierra Leonean land law. And they confronted the company, invoking law with specificity, with clarity, and they were backed up. The community paralegals were backed up by lawyers. I mean, that's a crucial piece, is that you don't want community paralegals working by themselves. You want the ability to litigate when push comes to shove. And so the company, faced with the prospect of mass non-cooperation and the prospect of litigation, the company backed down and they acknowledged that lease agreement that they had, which had been signed 6 hours away behind closed doors by an interim paramount chief who wasn't even from that place, that was invalid. And they were forced to give the land back. And then a subset of the community actually did decide to negotiate a smaller agreement on their own terms that were totally different from the terms in the original lease. And to me, that's an example where the organizing and legal knowledge were fused together. And the victory really came from that combination of those two. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're looking to do everywhere.
Sukti?
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Go for it.
May I just add on to that? Because I think what Vivek says really hits home at one of the areas of legal empowerment that I work on, which is the community-driven litigation part. And I think, Vivek sort of explained really well this idea of movement lawyering and the idea of organizers and lawyers working together. And I think I just really want to emphasize Vivek's sort of blurring of that distinction, because I think that's where legal empowerment is so critical. This idea that organizers do organizing and lawyers do lawyering. And that's what we need to explode, because in my experience doing community-driven litigation, our most powerful successes have come when there is no such distinction. And it's actually the organizers who are making the decision on how to litigate, making decisions on how to negotiate, making decisions on what claims to include in the complaint and and really who does the negotiation, right? And what's so critical about advancing legal empowerment in the US is getting lawyers to recognize and give up some of this territory that the legal profession creates, to say lawyers are the one who speaks to judges in courts. Lawyers are the ones who decide how witnesses testify. Lawyers are the ones who sit at the negotiation table. And it's the moments that we've achieved the greatest successes have been when organizers are the ones doing the negotiating, when community members are able to tell their own story in their most authentic way, as opposed to lawyers basically corrupting their story and often presenting people's authentic lives in the most sort of victimized caricature version of those stories. And so if we are committed to, in the US, to really empowering and shifting power to those who are impacted, lawyers need to be committed to pushing and changing courtroom practices, everyday lawyering strategies that we use, which are often all about keeping the power for ourselves.
Thank you, Lam. Jhody looks like she wants to jump in.
I was just agreeing with my brothers.
Okay, great. Before I forget, an awkward non sequitur pivot, the CLE code for this session is WICLE. Sorry for that, I forgot. And I think what we all want to also underline here is that we're having this conversation in a law school. There are law students that are embedded in the work that we're doing, that are eager to think about what is their role in this larger institutional building, system building process. And I think all four of us believe that there is an important role for lawyers and legal advocates in this space. It's just about how do we reposition? How do we step back? What does it look like to collaborate? And we think a lot about the healthcare space as a way in which, there has been more decentralization. By no means a perfect system, has its own hierarchies, but there are more folks engaged in healthcare work, healthcare delivery. And so there are places for us to look towards as possible, sources of inspiration. My question for you all is, Jhody, you touched upon this around your relationship to institutions. And Vivek, you talked about this in Sierra Leone when you were kind of in this place of transition, and what does it mean to kind of activate these systems or these laws? What do we see as legal empowerment's relationship to institutions, to system buildings, recognizing that there is an explicit goal, at least from the ones from the critical perspective, of transformation, that as is status quo systems are insufficient. So how do we, if I'm a law student, if I'm a young lawyer, if I'm a lawyer that's been around forever, I'm a community member, like, how do I think about institutional relationships and system buildings when thinking about it from a legal empowerment perspective?
I could jump in on that one. Sukti.
Yeah, go for it.
I think that's so crucial. You know, I feel like the bread and butter of what many of us do is walking with people to solve problems in the here and now. You know, Jhody, like helping someone who has a civil problem. Their family's getting evicted and they're stuck in prison, and then you deal with the eviction. Lam helping tenants resist eviction collectively. Mita Monya Jalo trying to fight back against a land grab. But as a movement, we've got to go further than that. You know, we got to go even further than that. Every single one of those struggles is vital. And we need to go even further, because ultimately we need to transform the systems that are making injustice possible. And a framework that I wanted to share that I think has emerged as helpful from the various experiences that we've been involved in and learned from around the world. We sometimes call it the legal empowerment cycle. And I just want to, if you don't mind, it looks like I can't share my screen. If it's easy to let me to do so, I was going to just show a slide. In the meantime, let's see, is that an easy problem? Oh yeah, it looks like someone already fixed it. I mean, so solving problems, you know, like in the process of solving problems, we know law, we use law, you know, it's important for people themselves who are affected by injustice to understand what the rules we already have say, to have a critical perspective on those rules, not to just assume that that's how it's supposed to be. You know, some of those rules are good, some of those rules are bad, but to be able to use them in a strategic way, the way Mrs. Jallow was invoking them when she was challenging that land grab. And there are two really powerful things that grow out of those grassroots efforts against immediate lived problems: learning and leadership. Many cases together, they help you to see how the system is working in practice. And if you pay attention, if you track data on how those different stories play out, that is, when you put it together, that is a portrait that often no one else has. We know what the rules say on the books, but there's often a total shortage of understanding of what happens when people actually try to use those rules. So that evidence from grassroots casework is crucial. And then leadership. I mean, people often, for many people around the world, their starting point is one of disaffection. Sometimes it's even a starting point of fear. And the process of learning and using the rules to take on a fight right in front of you, a fight in your neighborhood, something that affects your life right now, that can be a leadership journey where people can become stronger, they can be more confident, more able to stand up for themselves, and also to stand up for a better system for everyone. And so taking that learning and that leadership, what we have seen in really, really tough places in Sierra Leone, in Myanmar, in Mozambique, is that people can draw on the learning and leadership from grassroots cases to envision what better rules, better systems would look like, and to fight for those and win them. So in Sierra Leone right now, there's a couple bills in front of Parliament that would totally transform the land system. They would grant every community across the country the right to free, prior, informed consent over any industrial activity on their territory. They would empower local land use committees and mandate that those committees be 1/3 women. These bills would be a sea change in governance in Sierra Leone. And knock on wood, it looks like they could pass in the next couple months. And those didn't come out of nowhere. It was not like someone sat at a desk and wrote those up. They grew out of a decade of local struggles against land grabs, against pollution, like the one that Mrs. Jallow was involved in. If they do pass, if you do get a reform or a new policy commitment, that's not the end of the story. Those become new levers, new hooks, which communities then breathe life into in their immediate struggles. That's the reason why it's a wheel, not a one-way arrow. And so turning this wheel from knowing law and using law to shaping law and back again, that feels like a mission for all of us and a process through which we can deepen democracy, we can build systems that are more just and more effective.
Thank you, Vivek. I think that perspective is really helpful. And I'm thinking, Jhody, as Vivek is not sharing, he'll stop sharing his screen soon. There you go. Can you, we have about 4 minutes left or so before I do the pivot to the next thing. But can you share a little bit about how you see, what you see as like healthy institutions? Like what you have a particular perspective on that. I think a lot of folks are thinking about abolition of carceral systems, and how do you see legal empowerment's relationship to that, and where does the institutions kind of fit into that conversation from your eyes?
Absolutely. For me, when I came home and wanted to be a lawyer, I wanted to go to the law school in the city. I'm born and raised in Gainesville, Florida. So even though all my life I heard about the University of Florida, this crazy, people eating institution, I needed to be accredited and get through it, and before I even understood the language of legal empowerment, I used to go knock on the door. I used to go manifest and visualize in front of the law school and see myself there and introduce myself to the deans. I mean, these were like right out of prison before anybody knew my name. And so to me, legal empowerment gave me the legal identity to approach those systems. And then even joining the justice movement, the abolition of tear it all down. And I'll never forget thinking, if we tear it all down and burn it all down, I wanted to make sure that as many people were out of the institution, right, as possible. And so really for me, legal empowerment humanized not just the positions inside the institutions, but the people that were in there, and gave me relationships. And so for me, legal empowerment is not a heavy funded work in the United States. And so to me, the institutions give us access. It's my goal when I think about law students, law schools that we work with all over the country. When we're in those spaces, I'm a part of those spaces. It actually expands, right, the access to community. And so I do believe that the isolated communities, we have powerful institutions and knowledge, and resources, but those institutions do as well. And I think what makes up the institutions are the student community and the faculty community, and just the knowledge and the love. There's so many students that we get to also welcome into community. So to me, when we humanize the institutions through the work of legal empowerment, it expands our community. It also opens up opportunities for relationships. Not everybody wants to start a nonprofit. You can accomplish groundbreaking work and utilize these institutions, for what they're there for, as learning labs and study labs. And that doesn't just have to be related to the students. So it adds more value and resources, and it allows us to see one another. So to me, legal empowerment brought me face to face with the institution, but it also brought the institution out of their ivory tower and into our neighborhoods. And we have fun in the neighborhood, despite what the data says.
And institutions, as you're talking about it, are academic institutions, right? You're thinking of academic institutions, not
prison institutions. I lived in the prison, and while that's an institution, there are people living their lives. 80% of the women that I was incarcerated are serving their lives in prison, and they're lawyers, artists. So I have a vantage point of when I think about the institution and system, I can actually name, right, the people that make up the body, the inner body and soul and spirit of these institutions, and not just kind of harden my heart in that way. So prison institutions, academic institutions, organizations, I get into business too. And my community, when I have a legal identity, whether I'm in the public library, the post office, the school, the health place, I have a value and a right as a human being. And I don't just want service, I want to know how I can make it better. So it's really humanizing.
Thank you, Jhody. In the last couple of minutes we have, Lam, Vivek, anything else that you want to, there's so much we could talk about, but any kind of last juicy thoughts you want to share with the world out here? We'd love to hear from you.
I just have one quick suggestion for law students, which is I think legal empowerment is about having very vulnerable, humble relationships with communities and community members. And so I encourage anyone who's in law school or even current legal practitioners to really be willing to bring yourself humbly, authentically, and vulnerably into relationships, particularly with communities outside law schools, because I think those are the moments of learning and humanity that you don't get in law school, and which is so necessary for us to further work that is empowering and which will shift the power that we currently monopolize into the hands of people who should have them.
I might, and Lam, I love what you just said, and you modeled that vulnerability for all of us today, and I want to appreciate you for that. And really echoing something that you said a minute ago, I would encourage lawyers and law students to partner with organizers, find organizers, partner with them. I've seen over and over, and myself, I've been on transformative journeys with organizers, between lawyers and organizers. And then, as Lam said, break down the wall between the two of you. Start melting together the approaches that you each follow. And I think that will be advancing legal empowerment. I think the one other thing I'll say, and I love that we've got kind of a US audience, but people here from all around the world, because this has been a movement that has been global from the beginning. And the work, for example, that the Namati team is doing in DC and Baltimore and Delaware and Virginia, we are drawing heavily on lessons that we learned from people in Sierra Leone, people from India. And so I love that. I think that is so vital, that spirit of solidarity across borders and learning from one another. And we work with partners in Myanmar right now, where as many of you know, there was a military coup last February, a year ago, and the military snatched back what little progress for democracy had been made. A couple of our community paralegals that we worked with, that we partnered with, have been imprisoned. All of them have faced grave danger. One of them had their home raided at midnight by 100 people with weapons. And I guess I would just close with that reminder of how deeply under threat democracy is, and to really cherish the democracy we have, the space that we have, which I think, our colleagues in Myanmar envy, the things that we can say, the things that we can do, and then to fight to protect it and deepen it, because it is under threat here too. And so that spirit of deepening democracy in solidarity with others who are aiming to do the same thing, that's the call that I would leave us all with.
Oh, thank you three so much. I just have a 1-minute thing to say. Thank you for sharing so much of yourselves. Conversations about community paralegals, community-driven litigation, challenges. That is what we are going to be continuing this conversation for the next 2 days. There are sessions on each of those topics with an incredible mix of organizers, community members, paralegals, attorneys, researchers. So stay with us. We are taking a 15-minute break. And you will, in the chat, you'll see we're going to pivot into community action workshops from 11 to 12 Eastern Standard Time. We ask you and encourage you to join one of our workshops where we're going to dig in. How does this look like in practice? Legal empowerment in environmental work, in immigration work, in civil work, and in the criminal space. So join one of those workshops, please, from 11 to 12 p.m. And then come back here at 12:30. So it's an awkward 1 hour and 45 minutes from now, 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. Please come back to this Zoom link and we will pick up this conversation with the power of frontline justice advocates and community paralegals, with folks from Nigeria and folks here in the US really thinking with everything they got about how to build out this work. Dhanyabad. Thank you, my friends, Jhody, Vivek, Lam, for all that you do and all that you are, and looking forward to keeping this thing going. Bye, everybody.
Great to share space with you. Peace, everyone.